Rain hammered against the windows hard enough to blur the Manhattan skyline into gray streaks of light. Marcus stood near the kitchen island in complete silence, rolling the sleeves of his black dress shirt with the same calm precision he used in boardrooms. The espresso machine hissed softly behind him. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating. 3 calls. Then 4. Then 5. All from my younger brother. Before I answered, let me say this. Welcome to Calm Drama Episodes. If you love stories about family betrayal, quiet revenge, emotional comebacks, and shocking twists that leave entire families speechless, you're in the right place. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, back to the nightmare that changed my family forever. I stared at my brother's name on the screen like it belonged to a stranger. Because after 11 years of silence, that's exactly what he was. Are you going to answer it? Marcus asked quietly. He didn't even look up from his coffee. That unsettled me more. I declined the 6th call. A second later, another notification appeared. Please pick up. It's about Dad. Something cold moved through my chest. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Marcus finally glanced toward me. Calm eyes. Impossible to read. The same eyes my father once called dangerous. I still remembered that night. Crystal glasses. Cold smiles. My mother refusing to touch her wine after Marcus shook her hand. This marriage would be a disgrace to this family. 11 years later, somehow those words still lived inside me like fresh bruises. The phone rang again. Marcus took a slow sip of coffee. Answer it, Vanessa. Not nervous. Not curious. Certain. That was the first moment I realized something was wrong. I pressed accept. For a second, all I heard was breathing. Then my brother's voice cracked through the speaker. Vanessa, thank God. I leaned against the marble counter. What happened? Another silence. Not the normal kind. The kind people use when they're trying to figure out how much truth they can survive saying out loud. It's Dad, he whispered. The company's collapsing. Marcus didn't react. Not even slightly. My stomach tightened. Whitmore Holdings wasn't just a company. It was Connecticut real estate royalty. Luxury developments. Private investors. Country club partnerships. Political connections. My father built his entire identity around that empire. And he had destroyed our family protecting it. What do you mean collapsing? I asked carefully. We're out of options. Rain rattled harder against the glass. There's a restructuring deal, my brother continued. It's the only thing keeping federal investigators from freezing everything. I closed my eyes. Federal investigators. Jesus. What does this have to do with me? Another pause. Then I heard him exhale shakily. The bank won't finalize the deal without one last signature. I frowned. Whose signature? The silence that followed lasted just a little too long. And suddenly, before he answered, I already knew. I slowly turned toward Marcus. He stood near the windows now, one hand in his pocket, staring out over the city like he'd heard this conversation 100 times already. My brother finally spoke. Marcus Reed. The room went completely still. Not even the rain sounded real anymore. What? I whispered. The investment group controlling Dad's debt. I know what debt means, Ethan. My voice came out sharper than I intended. He swallowed audibly over the phone. Marcus owns the company handling the restructuring. I looked at my husband again. No surprise. No confusion. Nothing. Just that same terrifying calm. And suddenly pieces of the last decade began rearranging themselves in my head. The late nights. The silent phone calls. The financial reports spread across his office desk at 2 in the morning. The locked leather document case he never let anyone touch. The one sitting in his office right now. Dark brown leather. Silver lock. Always closed. My throat tightened. You knew, I said softly. Marcus finally met my eyes. And for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something dangerous underneath the calm. Not anger. Worse. Patience. 11 years of it. Ethan kept talking quickly now, panic leaking into every word. If the papers aren't signed by Monday, we lose everything. Dad's already mortgaged properties in Greenwich and Stamford. Investors are pulling out. The attorneys think criminal charges are coming if the restructuring fails. I barely heard him, because suddenly I was remembering something Marcus told me years ago. Back when we lived in that tiny Queen's apartment with the broken radiator and cockroaches in the walls. I had been crying over another Christmas card my mother sent addressed only to current resident. Marcus held me that night until I fell asleep. Right before I drifted off, he whispered something into my hair. One day, they'll need something only I can give them. At the time, I thought he meant forgiveness. God, I was stupid. Vanessa? Ethan's voice shook again. Are you there? Yes. Dad wants to meet. Marcus walked past me toward his office. Slowly. Controlled. The same way he moved through every room when he was thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Then he stopped near the hallway without turning around. Tell him Saturday, he said calmly. Ethan went silent. Because even through the phone, my brother understood something humiliating. Charles Whitmore no longer controlled the room. Marcus did. Saturday, Ethan repeated quietly. Then the call ended. The apartment fell silent except for the storm outside. I stared at Marcus's back as he disappeared into his office. A second later, I heard the metallic click of the leather case unlocking for the first time in 11 years. And suddenly, I realized my husband had never forgotten a single thing my family did to him. Not one word. Not one insult. Not one humiliation. The terrifying part? I no longer believed this was revenge. I thought it was something much colder than that. The first time my parents met Marcus, my mother changed the dinner plates. I noticed because she only used those plates for people she considered important. White porcelain with thin gold trim. Imported from Italy. Hand-washed separately from everything else in the house. But 20 minutes before Marcus arrived, I walked into the kitchen and found her quietly replacing them with the plain ivory set we used for ordinary guests. No gold trim. No crystal placements. Nothing too special. It was subtle. That was how my mother preferred her cruelty. Quiet enough to deny later. You switched the table setting, I said carefully. She didn't look up from the silverware drawer. The others were too formal. That's never stopped you before. A small pause. Then she shut the drawer harder than necessary. Vanessa, she sighed, not everything needs to become an argument. I should have understood then what kind of night it would become. Outside, December snow covered the Whitmore estate in perfect white silence. The house looked like something out of an old money magazine spread. Tall columns. Warm lighting. Luxury without effort. The kind of home built to impress people who already had money. My father cared deeply about that kind of impression. Especially during charity season. Especially when the guests at church whispered about whose children were successful enough to continue the family legacy. Marcus arrived exactly on time. Dark wool coat. Simple black tie. Calm expression. My mother opened the door, smiled politely, then immediately glanced at his hands. Not his face. His hands. Checking for signs of class the way people like her always did. Watches. Cufflinks. Shoes. Invisible tests. Marcus noticed. I knew he noticed because his eyes flicked toward mine for half a second. But he smiled anyway. Mrs. Whitmore, he said warmly. Thank you for inviting me. Her smile tightened. Of course. She stepped aside slowly, like allowing him inside physically hurt her. My father waited in the dining room pouring bourbon into crystal glasses. He didn't stand when Marcus entered. That alone told me everything. Charles Whitmore stood for governors, investors, pastors, old Yale friends. But not Marcus. My father looked him over once before taking a slow sip. So, he said calmly, you're the attorney. Not, nice to meet you. Not, Vanessa's told us a lot about you. Just, you're the attorney. Marcus nodded once. Yes, sir. Something dangerous flashed briefly across my father's face at the word sir. Disappointment. Because Marcus wasn't giving him a reason to attack openly. And men like my father preferred clean battles. Dinner started quietly. Too quietly. The sound of silverware against porcelain seemed louder than our conversation. My younger brother, Ethan, mostly stared at his plate. My sister, Camille, kept checking her phone beneath the tablecloth. And my mother smiled constantly in that cold, artificial way women smile at country club fundraisers. Then my father leaned back in his chair. "So Marcus," he said casually, "where exactly did you say your family was from?" "Atlanta." Simple question. But not really. Marcus folded his napkin once before answering. "Georgia." "And before that?" There it was. The room tightened instantly. My father swirled bourbon in his glass without looking at me. Marcus stayed calm. "My mother still lives there," he replied evenly. "I'm sure she's proud." The way he said proud made my stomach twist. My father always spoke in layered meanings. Every sentence carried a second knife hidden underneath it. My mother jumped in quickly. "What Charles means is that Vanessa grew up in a very specific environment." Marcus nodded politely. "I understand." "No," my father said quietly. "I don't think you do." The room fell silent. Outside, snow tapped softly against the windows. Then my father smiled. That was the terrifying part. Not anger. Not yelling. The smile. "You seem intelligent," he continued. "Which surprises me." I nearly dropped my fork. "Dad." "What?" he asked calmly. "We're having a conversation." Marcus lifted his wineglass slowly, but never drank from it. He was studying my father carefully now. The way lawyers study witnesses before cross-examination. "You built your own law firm?" my father asked. "Not yet." Another sip of bourbon. Vanessa always was emotional. Impulsive. She mistakes potential for reality. My cheeks burned. "Can we not do this tonight?" My mother gave me a warning glance immediately. The same glance she used during church whenever I said something socially inconvenient. Marcus finally spoke again. "With respect, sir, I care about your daughter very much." My father laughed softly. Not kindly. "You care about her now." The sentence hung there. Heavy. Ugly. I realized then this dinner had never been about meeting Marcus. It was an interrogation. A test Marcus had already failed before he walked through the door. Camille finally looked up from her phone. "So, what do your parents do?" she asked casually. I knew my sister well enough to recognize fake innocence. Marcus answered anyway. "My mother's a nurse." "And your father?" A pause. "He passed away when I was 14. Camille shifted awkwardly. "Oh." But my father kept staring. No sympathy. No apology. Just calculation. Men like Charles Whitmore measured people by usefulness. Connections. Money. Legacy. Marcus came from none of the right bloodlines. That mattered more to my father than character ever would. Dinner ended with coffee in the sitting room beside the fireplace. My mother intentionally handed Marcus the cheaper porcelain mug instead of the china set. Again subtle. Again deliberate. And again Marcus noticed without reacting. That frightened me. Because silence from emotional people is normal. Silence from controlled people is dangerous. At one point my father asked Marcus about golf memberships. Then yacht clubs. Then private investment circles. Each question designed to expose what Marcus lacked. But Marcus answered every insult with calm politeness. Never defensive. Never emotional. Almost patient. Finally my father set down his glass. "I think we should speak honestly." Every muscle in my body tightened. "Charles," my mother warned softly. "No. Vanessa's old enough now." He turned toward me directly. "You are making a serious mistake." The fireplace crackled behind us. Nobody moved. "You grew up with opportunities most people dream about," he continued. "A future. Connections. Stability." His eyes shifted toward Marcus. "And you're prepared to throw all of that away?" Marcus didn't speak. My father leaned forward slightly. "For what exactly?" There it was. Not concern. Not protection. Humiliation. I looked at Marcus, terrified he would finally snap. but instead, he simply placed his untouched coffee cup carefully onto the table, perfectly centered on the coaster. Controlled. Measured. Then he looked directly at my father for the first time all evening, and smiled slightly. Not angry. Not offended. Certain. "I think Vanessa is worth more than your approval, sir." The room went completely silent. My mother's face paled instantly. Camille stared openly now. Even Ethan looked up. And my father smiled. But this time there was no warmth left in it at all. Because for the first time that night, someone had challenged him without fear. Then he said the sentence that would destroy our family for the next 11 years. "If you marry him," my father said coldly, "don't expect to remain part of this family." And suddenly, I realized this dinner had never been about Marcus earning acceptance. It was about my parents forcing me to choose. My father gave me exactly 8 days to change my mind. Not 7. Not 10. 8. I remember because he wrote the deadline himself on the back of one of his business cards before sliding it across his office desk like a legal notice. The heavy cream-colored card sat between us beneath the warm glow of his banker's lamp. December 18th. As if my relationship had become a corporate negotiation. "You're being dramatic," I said quietly. My father leaned back in his leather chair. "No, Vanessa. I'm being realistic." Outside his office windows, snow covered the golf course behind our estate in perfect, untouched white. Everything about that room felt designed to remind people who held power there. Dark walnut shelves. Framed photographs with senators. Yale memorabilia. Expensive silence. My father built rooms the same way he built his reputation. Intimidation disguised as elegance. "You barely know Marcus," he continued. "That's not true. You know the version of him he wants you to see." I crossed my arms tightly. "And what version is that?" My father's expression barely changed. "A man who understands exactly what your last name is worth." The sentence hit harder than I expected. Not because I believed him. Because a small part of me realized he genuinely believed himself. That was the frightening thing about my father. He rarely saw himself as cruel. Only correct. "You think he's using me?" "I think men like Marcus don't accidentally end up around families like ours." Men like Marcus. There it was again. Never explicit enough to repeat publicly. Always clean enough to survive scrutiny. I stood slowly. "You know what's funny?" My father raised an eyebrow. "You keep talking about Marcus like he manipulated me. But you've spent my entire life trying to decide who I'm allowed to love." His jaw tightened slightly. That tiny reaction told me I'd finally hit something real. "Vanessa," he said calmly, "there are consequences for the choices you make. And there are consequences for the choices you make too." For the first time in the conversation, his eyes hardened completely. Then came the ultimatum. "If you marry him," he said quietly, "you will lose financial access to every Whitmore family account effective immediately." The room went still. I stared at him. He continued speaking in the same controlled tone people use when discussing taxes. "Your trust distributions will stop. Your name will be removed from future inheritance planning. And I'll make it very clear publicly that your decisions no longer reflect this family." Not emotional. Administrative. Like erasing me was paperwork. I laughed once under my breath because suddenly crying felt too humiliating. "You already decided all this before talking to me, didn't you?" Silence. That was answer enough. I looked toward the family photograph sitting behind his desk. Me at 16. Camille smiling perfectly beside me. Ethan still awkward and skinny. My mother wearing pearls. My father standing proudly behind all of us like ownership itself. A staged version of love. "You know what hurts the most?" I asked quietly. My father said nothing. "You care more about preserving your reputation than keeping your daughter." Something flickered in his expression then. Not guilt. Offense. Because men like Charles Whitmore viewed disagreement as disrespect. "You're too emotional to understand this right now," he replied. There was no point continuing after that. I left his office shaking. Downstairs, my mother waited in the kitchen pretending to organize flowers. White roses. Imported orchids. Christmas arrangements for some charity fundraiser. She didn't look surprised to see me crying. That hurt too. Your father is trying to protect you, she said softly. I laughed bitterly. From what? She finally turned toward me. Vanessa, people are already talking. Of course they were. People in Greenwich always talked. At church. At galas. At tennis clubs. At private schools. Rich communities survive on gossip disguised as concern. You think this is about race, my mother continued carefully. But it's about compatibility. Lifestyle. Background. I stared at her. You realize that sounds worse, right? Her lips pressed together tightly. Then she said something I would never forget. You grew up with advantages Marcus will never fully understand. There it was. The truth hiding beneath all the polished language. Not just race. Class. Bloodlines. Social hierarchy. My mother genuinely believed certain people belonged inside their world. And others didn't. No matter how educated. No matter how kind. No matter how successful. I wiped my eyes angrily. You know Marcus never once insulted either of you. That's not the point. It should be. She stepped closer carefully like approaching someone unstable. You're throwing away security for feelings. No, I whispered. I'm choosing someone who actually loves me. For the first time, my mother looked genuinely hurt. But even then, she still chose pride. 3 weeks later, Marcus and I got married in a small chapel outside Manhattan. Nothing extravagant. Winter flowers. Soft candlelight. 30 guests. Mostly his family. His mother cried through the entire ceremony. Not dramatic crying. Quiet emotional tears she kept trying to hide with tissues in her purse. When she hugged me afterward, she whispered, "You chose love. Don't ever apologize for that." And suddenly, I realized no one in my family had said anything remotely close to that in months. My parents didn't attend. Neither did Camille. Ethan texted me at 2:14 a.m. the night before. I'm sorry. That was all. No explanation. No defense. Just cowardice wrapped in 2 words. But the real humiliation came afterward. 2 days after the wedding, my father hosted the annual Whitmore Foundation Christmas Gala at the Greenwich Country Club. 500 guests. Local politicians. Investors. Church leaders. Developers. Old money families. The kind of room where reputations got built quietly over champagne. Around 9 that evening, my phone started exploding with messages. At first I ignored them. Then one voicemail came through from an old college friend. Vanessa, I think you should know what your dad just said. My stomach dropped instantly. I found the video online less than 10 minutes later. Someone had recorded it on their phone. My father stood near the ballroom stage holding a glass of champagne while Christmas music played softly behind him. Perfect tuxedo. Perfect posture. Perfect smile. I'd also like to clarify, he announced smoothly, that my daughter Vanessa has chosen a different direction in life and is no longer associated with Whitmore family holdings or future operations. Murmurs spread across the ballroom immediately. Someone laughed awkwardly. My father continued smiling through all of it. As difficult as these situations can be, family legacy requires difficult decisions. I stopped the video before it ended. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Marcus walked into our apartment seconds later carrying takeout containers from a Thai restaurant downstairs. The second he saw my face, he knew. Quietly, he set the food on the counter. What happened? I handed him the phone without speaking. He watched the video once. No reaction. Then again. Still nothing. That scared me more than anger would have. Finally, he placed the phone face down carefully onto the kitchen table. I'm sorry, I whispered suddenly. Marcus frowned slightly. For what? My family. The room fell silent. Then Marcus stepped closer and gently touched my face. This was always about them, he said quietly. Not you. I broke down crying against his chest then. All the humiliation. All the gossip. All the rejection. And Marcus simply held me there in silence. Steady. Controlled. like a man surviving weather he already expected. Then after several minutes, he said something so quietly I almost missed it. One day, he murmured, "Your father's name won't protect him anymore." At the time, I thought it was pain talking. Now I know better. The first apartment Marcus and I rented smelled like wet drywall and burnt radiator dust. The leasing agent called it cozy. What she meant was small enough to hear strangers arguing through the walls at 2 in the morning. Queens in January felt colder than Connecticut ever had. Not because of the weather. Because for the first time in my life, nobody was cushioning me from reality. No family money. No safety net. No emergency account quietly handled by my father's assistants. Just me. And Marcus. The apartment sat above a laundromat beside a Dominican grocery store with flickering neon signs that buzzed all night outside our bedroom window. Our kitchen was barely large enough for 2 people to stand comfortably. But Marcus still cooked dinner almost every night. Usually pasta. Rice bowls. Cheap takeout split into portions for leftovers. One night, while stirring tomato sauce on the stove, he asked casually, "Do you miss it?" I knew exactly what he meant. The estate. The money. The version of life I'd been trained for. I leaned against the counter quietly. Sometimes I admitted. Marcus nodded once. No judgment. That was one of the things I loved most about him. He never punished honesty. "I don't miss them," I added softly. That wasn't completely true. I missed the idea of them. The fantasy version of family. The people I kept hoping they would become. Marcus turned off the stove. "They'll either change," he said calmly, "or they won't." Simple. Final. Like he had already accepted an outcome I still fought against emotionally every single day. At the law firm, Marcus worked brutal hours. Corporate litigation. Contract disputes. Mergers. He left before sunrise most mornings and returned after dark carrying exhaustion in his shoulders like extra weight. Still, he never complained. Not once. Meanwhile, I took a teaching job at a public elementary school in Brooklyn. The salary barely covered groceries after rent. But I loved the children immediately. They didn't care about country clubs, family names, or social hierarchy. They cared whether you listened. Whether you showed up. Whether you remembered their favorite color. Things my own parents somehow failed to understand. The first real crack came 3 months into the marriage. I was checking our mailbox downstairs when I found a cream-colored envelope with my mother's handwriting across the front. For one stupid, hopeful second, my heart lifted. Maybe she missed me. Maybe she wanted to talk. Maybe enough time had passed. I carried the envelope upstairs carefully like something fragile. Marcus looked up from his laptop as I entered the apartment. "You okay?" "I think it's from my mom." He watched my face closely but said nothing. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside was the annual Whitmore family Christmas card. Glossy photo. Perfect smiles. Matching black formal wear in front of the estate fireplace. Camille. Ethan. My parents. No me. No mention of me. Not even my name. Just, "The Whitmore family wishes you a blessed holiday season." I stared at it for a long time without speaking. Marcus quietly closed his laptop. Then he reached for the card. Not angrily. Carefully. He looked at the photograph once before setting it face down on the kitchen counter. Like he didn't want me staring at the evidence of my own erasure. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Something inside me cracked then. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Worse. Quiet. I sat down at the kitchen table and cried silently while traffic lights flashed red and yellow through the apartment blinds. Marcus sat beside me the entire time, one hand resting lightly against my back. No speeches. No fake optimism. Just presence. That mattered more. Weeks later, my trust fund officially disappeared. I learned through a formal legal notice mailed by my father's attorneys. Not a phone call. Not a conversation. Paperwork. The document stated that due to personal decisions inconsistent with family governance expectations, all discretionary financial distributions had been terminated indefinitely. I read the sentence 3 times. family governance expectations. That was how my father described disowning his daughter. Corporate language made cruelty easier for people like him. That same week, Marcus lost a promotion opportunity at his firm. Officially, the position went to another attorney with better senior partnership alignment. Unofficially, one of my father's golf partners sat on the firm's advisory board. I knew it. Marcus knew it. But Marcus never said my father's name out loud. That frightened me more than blame would have. Because Marcus remembered things quietly. One night, I woke around 3 in the morning thirsty. The apartment was dark except for light spilling from the kitchen. Marcus sat alone at the table wearing sweatpants and reading financial reports. Stacks of paper surrounded him. Numbers. Property records. Corporate filings. His expression looked distant. Focused. I walked closer slowly. What are you doing? He glanced up immediately and closed one folder. Work. At 3 in the morning? A small smile touched his face. New York doesn't sleep, remember? I almost laughed. Then I noticed the document beneath his hand. Whitmore Holdings. My stomach tightened instantly. Marcus followed my eyes calmly. Neither of us spoke for a second. Finally, I asked, "Why are you reading my father's company reports?" He leaned back slightly in his chair. Because your father's business is over-leveraged. The answer came too quickly. Too prepared. You've been following his company? Not emotionally. That response unsettled me immediately. Not emotionally. Meaning. Strategically. Marcus stacked the papers neatly together. The market's shifting, he continued calmly. Commercial luxury developments are carrying dangerous debt right now. I crossed my arms tightly. You sound like you're studying him. Marcus looked at me carefully then. Long enough for tension to settle between us. Finally, he said, "Your father built his life believing money made him untouchable." Something cold moved through me. Marcus. He weaponized his influence against us, Vanessa. His voice never rose. That somehow made the words heavier. He cut off your future financially. He pressured people professionally. He publicly humiliated you. I swallowed hard. Marcus stood slowly and walked toward the sink. Still calm. Still controlled. I learned something growing up, he said quietly while rinsing his coffee cup. People who use power care deeply when they lose it. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Then Marcus looked back toward me. And, for a second, I saw the same expression he wore at my parents' dinner table years earlier. Polite. Controlled. Dangerously patient. But then it vanished. He stepped closer and touched my forehead gently. You should go back to sleep. I wanted to ask more questions. Instead, I nodded. Because deep down, I think part of me already understood something terrifying. Marcus wasn't obsessed with revenge. That would have been easier. Revenge is emotional. Temporary. Messy. What Marcus felt toward my father was colder than hatred. It was calculation. And somehow, that scared me far more. The next morning, I found a new object sitting inside Marcus's office closet before leaving for work. A dark leather document case with a silver lock. I had never seen it before. When I touched the handle, Marcus appeared quietly behind me. Don't worry about that, he said gently. Not angry. Not defensive. Just firm. Then he kissed my forehead, grabbed his coat, and left for work. The lock clicked softly shut behind him. And standing there alone in that tiny apartment, I suddenly realized my husband had started preparing for something. I just didn't know what yet. The hardest part about being erased by your family isn't the silence. It's watching them continue living normally without you. Birthdays still happen. Christmas photos still get posted. Thanksgiving tables still fill up. Your chair just disappears. And eventually, everyone starts acting like it was never there to begin with. The first Thanksgiving after our wedding, I baked my mother's sweet potato casserole recipe from memory. Too much cinnamon. Not enough brown sugar. Marcus still ate 2 servings without complaint. That bad? I asked quietly. He smiled slightly. I've had worse. Outside, Rain slid down the apartment windows while football commentators shouted from our tiny living room television. I tried not to think about the Whitmore estate 2 states away. The long dining table. My father carving turkey. Camille pretending to help in the kitchen while secretly avoiding responsibility. Ethan drinking too much wine because he hated awkward silence. My family was probably sitting in those same rooms pretending I had never existed. At some point during dinner, my phone buzzed. Instagram notification. I shouldn't have opened it. But loneliness makes people self-destructive. Camille had posted a family photo. Matching cream sweaters. Fireplace lit behind them. Caption. Grateful for family this year. Over 400 comments. Beautiful family. Goals. So blessed. I stared at the screen until Marcus quietly took the phone from my hand and locked it. You don't deserve this, he said softly. I laughed once under my breath. That doesn't seem to matter much. Marcus looked at me carefully across the table. Then he reached over and squeezed my hand. Not to them, he corrected. That distinction mattered more than he probably realized. A year later, I found out I was pregnant. Twins. I cried in the doctor's office before we even made it back to the car. Not from fear. From grief. Because deep down, I still wanted my mother. I wanted advice. Excitement. Support. I wanted someone to tell me I'd be okay. Marcus held my hand while snow fell quietly across the hospital parking garage. We'll figure it out, he said calmly. We always did. I mailed my parents ultrasound photos anyway. Even after everything. Even after the silence. Because part of me still believed love could shame people into becoming better. 3 weeks later, the envelope came back unopened. Red stamp across the front. Return to sender. No note. No explanation. Just rejection processed through federal mail. I stood in our kitchen staring at the envelope so long the kettle started screaming on the stove behind me. Marcus turned it off immediately. Then he looked at the envelope once before placing it inside a drawer beneath the coffee machine. Not trash. Not destroyed. Stored. That was the first time I noticed Marcus never threw evidence away. Years passed strangely after the twins arrived. Fast and slow at the same time. Lily inherited Marcus's calm eyes. Jackson inherited my inability to hide emotion. Marcus adored them quietly. Early morning pancakes. Midnight diaper changes. Tiny winter coats lined beside the apartment door. He built stability carefully. Piece by piece. Meanwhile, my family continued pretending we didn't exist. My mother never acknowledged the children publicly. Not once. At church functions, according to an old family friend, she referred to me only as our daughter in New York. Like saying my name physically hurt her. One afternoon, I made the mistake of calling home after Lily got pneumonia. I don't even know why I called. Exhaustion maybe. Fear. I just wanted my mother. The housekeeper answered first. Then after several minutes, my mother finally picked up. Hello. Her voice sounded distant. Polished. Controlled. Mom, I whispered. Silence. Not shocked silence. Prepared silence. Like she had rehearsed emotional distance long ago. What is it, Vanessa? I looked toward Lily sleeping against Marcus's chest on the couch beside me. She's sick. Another pause. I'm sorry to hear that. That was all. No. How bad? Is she okay? Do you need anything? Just professional sympathy. I realized then my mother had trained herself to love me conditionally. And once I stopped performing the version of daughter she wanted, the love disappeared too. She's your granddaughter, I said quietly. My mother inhaled sharply. Vanessa, don't do this. Do what? This emotional manipulation. I almost laughed from disbelief. Marcus looked up immediately from the couch, reading my expression instantly. You know what? I whispered. Forget I called. Then I hung up first. My hands shook afterward for almost an hour. Marcus never asked what she said. He already knew. A few months later, Ethan reached out secretly. Not a call. A text. Late at night. How are the kids? That was how cowardly guilt sounds. Small. Careful. Safe. I sent him pictures anyway. Within seconds he responded. They're beautiful. Then, Dad doesn't know I texted you. Of course he didn't. Everything in my family operated through permission and fear. Ethan asked if he could visit sometime. I said yes immediately. Then 3 days before the visit, he canceled. Family stuff. Sorry. I didn't reply. Marcus found me crying quietly in the bathroom afterward while the twins slept down the hall. He was trying, I defended weakly. Marcus leaned against the doorway silently for a moment. No, he said carefully. He was trying not to feel guilty. The words hurt because they were true. By our 7th wedding anniversary, Marcus's consulting work had started changing financially. Subtle changes at first. Better apartment. Nicer suits. Private client dinners in Manhattan. But Marcus never acted wealthy. That was the strange part. He still drove used cars. Still bought coffee from street vendors. Still wore the same watch he'd owned since law school. Success didn't seem emotional to him. It seemed tactical. One evening I attended a charity fundraiser for my school in Manhattan. Nothing glamorous. Mostly donors and education advocates. I almost skipped it after recognizing one of the Whitmore family's longtime social friends near the entrance. Patricia Holloway. Connecticut old money. Professional gossip disguised as philanthropy. She recognized me immediately. Her eyes widened slightly before rearranging themselves into artificial warmth. Vanessa, she said carefully. My goodness. I forced a smile. How have you been? Oh, you know. Her gaze flicked subtly toward my wedding ring. People still talk about your father sometimes. Of course they did. Families like ours treated scandal like entertainment. Patricia lowered her voice. You know, your mother worries about you. The lie was almost impressive. I stared at her for a second. Then I asked quietly, when was the last time she called her grandchildren? Patricia's expression froze instantly. That silence told me everything. When I got home later that night, Marcus sat in his office reviewing documents beside the leather case again. Always the case. Always locked. He looked up as I entered. Tough night? I slipped off my heels slowly. I think my parents convinced themselves they're the victims. Marcus nodded once like he'd expected nothing else. Then he closed the folder in front of him. But not before I caught the name across the top page. Whitmore Commercial Holdings. Again. A chill moved through me. Why do you keep watching my father's company? Marcus studied me carefully for several seconds. Then he answered honestly for the first time. Because men like your father don't believe consequences apply to them. His voice stayed calm. Too calm. You think he deserves consequences? I think actions create outcomes. Lawyer language. Precise. Controlled. Dangerous. I walked closer slowly. Marcus, what exactly are you doing? For a moment, the room went completely quiet. The city lights reflected softly across the office windows behind him. Then Marcus rested one hand lightly against the leather case. Not protectively. Almost thoughtfully. And suddenly, I realized the case was getting heavier. Thicker. More full. Years of documents now. Years of records. Evidence. Preparation. Marcus looked at me with that same unreadable expression that had terrified my father years earlier. Then he said quietly, building options. And for some reason, that answer frightened me more than revenge ever could. The first time I realized Marcus had become wealthy, he was still wearing the same winter coat he bought during our 2nd year of marriage. Dark charcoal. Slight tear near the inside pocket. Missing one button near the cuff. By then, we had already moved out of Queens into a quiet brownstone rental in Brooklyn Heights with exposed brick walls and windows overlooking the river. It wasn't flashy. That was intentional. Marcus hated flashy. Do you ever plan on buying a new coat? I asked one morning while helping Lily tie her shoes before school. Marcus glanced down at himself. It still works. Jackson laughed from the kitchen table. Dad dresses like a substitute math teacher. Marcus nodded seriously. A financially responsible substitute math teacher. The twins burst into laughter. That was Marcus. The same man negotiating seven-figure deals during the day still packed school lunches at 6 in the morning. Still walked the kids to school whenever he could. Still fixed leaking faucets himself even though we could finally afford not to care about leaking faucets. Success changed our circumstances, not him. That alone separated Marcus from almost every wealthy man I had grown up around. My father treated money like theater. Marcus treated it like infrastructure. Quiet, useful, strategic. By our 9th anniversary, his consulting company had offices in Manhattan, Chicago, and Atlanta. Officially, Marcus specialized in corporate restructuring and distressed acquisitions. Unofficially, he understood something most powerful people ignored. Desperate companies make desperate decisions. And Marcus was very good at recognizing desperation before anyone else did. The strange thing was how invisible he remained through all of it. No magazine profiles. No business podcasts. No interviews. Nothing. Meanwhile, other executives spent fortunes trying to appear successful online. Marcus preferred disappearing completely. One evening, I attended a private client dinner with him in Manhattan for the first time. The restaurant overlooked Central Park. Low lighting. Quiet jazz music. Wall Street money everywhere. The kind of room my father would have loved being seen inside. Marcus moved through it effortlessly. Not performative. Not arrogant. Comfortable. That surprised me more than anything. Power fit him naturally. At one point during dinner, one of the investors laughed and said, "You're impossible to research, Marcus." Marcus smiled faintly. That's usually intentional. The men around the table laughed. But I noticed something else. Respect. Real respect. Not the shallow social approval my father chased endlessly. This was different. These men trusted Marcus because he delivered results quietly. No ego. No performance. Just precision. Later that night, during the drive home, I watched city lights blur across the car windows. "You never told me how big the company became," I said softly. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. "You never asked." "That's not true." "You asked if we were stable," he corrected calmly. "Not how wealthy we were." I thought about that quietly. Maybe he was right. Money stopped feeling emotional to me years ago. After losing everything once, stability mattered more than luxury ever could. Still, something about Marcus unsettled me lately. Not because he changed. Because he hadn't. Even as his influence grew, he remained intensely controlled. Like someone moving toward a destination nobody else could see yet. Around that same time, my father's name started appearing in financial articles. At first, the problems sounded temporary. Market slowdown. Luxury development delays. Refinancing pressure. Normal corporate language designed to avoid panic. But Marcus noticed immediately. One Saturday morning, I found him sitting alone in the study reading an article about Whitmore commercial properties. Coffee untouched beside him. He looked almost thoughtful. "Is it serious?" I asked carefully. Marcus folded the paper once. "Yes." That single word tightened something in my chest. "Can they recover?" He leaned back slowly. "Your father expanded too aggressively after the Miami projects." I frowned. "You know details about the Miami projects?" Marcus gave me a look I couldn't fully read. "I know details about most major real estate debt structures on the East Coast." The answer sounded professional. But something underneath it felt personal. He stood and carried his coffee cup toward the sink. Then casually added, "He also borrowed assuming reputation would protect him." That sounded exactly like my father. For decades, people gave Charles Whitmore better deals simply because he was Charles Whitmore. Old money creates invisible protection. At least for a while. What happens if the projects fail? I asked quietly. Marcus rinsed the cup carefully before answering. Then the debt gets sold. Simple. Cold. Final. That night I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I wandered downstairs for water and noticed light coming from Marcus's office again. Always the office. Always late at night. He sat behind the desk reviewing financial documents spread across multiple folders. And beside him, the leather case. Still locked. Still growing thicker every year. Marcus looked up immediately when I entered. You should be asleep. I could say the same thing. A small smile touched his face briefly. I walked closer slowly, then stopped. One of the documents on his desk displayed the Whitmore Company logo again. Only this time, there were numbers handwritten across the margins. Debt percentages. Acquisition figures. Property valuations. My stomach tightened. Marcus. His eyes lifted calmly toward mine. Are you buying parts of my father's company? Silence. Long enough to answer the question without words. Finally, he closed the folder. Indirectly. The room suddenly felt colder. What does that mean? It means other firms are unloading risk. And you're purchasing it? Some of it. My pulse quickened slightly. Why? Marcus studied me for several seconds before speaking. Because distressed debt creates leverage. Lawyer language again. Controlled. Careful. Emotionally neutral. But I knew him too well now. This wasn't random business. Not anymore. You've been planning something, I whispered. Marcus didn't deny it. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows overlooking Brooklyn. For a moment neither of us moved. Then he stood slowly and walked toward me. You remember your father's Christmas gala? He asked quietly. My chest tightened instantly. Of course I remembered. The video. The humiliation. The public disowning. Marcus continued calmly. He believed public humiliation would isolate us. I swallowed hard. But he underestimated something. What? Marcus's expression stayed unreadable. How patient I can be. The words settled heavily between us. Not angry. Not emotional. Certain. I stared at him carefully. Marcus, are you trying to destroy my father? For the first time in years. He hesitated. Just slightly. Then he answered with terrifying honesty. No. Relief almost came. Almost. Until he continued. I'm waiting for him to destroy himself. The room went completely silent. I suddenly remembered something my father once told me when I was little. Powerful men never attack emotionally. They wait. Standing there in the dim office light. Watching my husband beside years of hidden financial records. I realized Marcus and my father were more alike than either of them would ever admit. The difference was simple. One man used power to protect his image. The other used power to protect the people he loved. Marcus touched my hand gently. Then he nodded toward the leather case. One day, he said quietly, you'll understand why I kept all of this. I looked at the case again. Dark leather. Silver lock. Years of silence stored inside it. And, for the first time, I wasn't sure whether I wanted it opened or not. The collapse started quietly. That's how powerful families fall. Not with explosions. With whispers. A delayed payment here. A canceled project there. An article buried halfway down the business section nobody notices until it's too late. By the 10th year of my marriage, the Whitmore name had started losing its shine in Connecticut. You could feel it socially before you could prove it financially. Country club invitations slowed. Political fundraisers became smaller. People stopped mentioning my father with automatic admiration. Old money communities are like sharks. They smell weakness early. One October morning, I walked into our kitchen and found Marcus reading the Wall Street Journal beside his coffee. He slid the paper toward me silently. The headline read, Whitmore commercial faces federal scrutiny over development financing. My chest tightened immediately. The article mentioned hidden debt exposure, inflated property valuations, regulatory investigations, and liquidity concerns. But one sentence stood out more than anything else. Several investors familiar with the situation have begun quietly distancing themselves from Whitmore leadership. Distancing themselves. Translation. The wealthy had started abandoning my father. Marcus watched me carefully across the kitchen island. You okay? I nodded automatically. Then stopped. No, I admitted softly. Because despite everything, seeing my family collapse still hurt. Marcus folded the newspaper carefully. Loving people doesn't erase what they did, he said quietly. I stared down at the article again. My father spent decades building his reputation like armor. Now the same people who once praised him were slowly stepping back to protect themselves. There's something horrifying about watching social power disappear in real time, especially from people who built their entire identity around it. A week later, Camille called me unexpectedly. The first call in almost 9 years. I almost ignored it. But curiosity is dangerous. Vanessa? Her voice sounded strangely careful. Not warm. Measured. Like someone approaching a stray animal they weren't sure would bite. Hi, Camille. A pause. Then, how are the kids? Not, how are you? The same emotional habits. Just polished differently. They're good. Another silence. Then finally, Dad's dealing with a lot right now. There it was. Not reconciliation. Preparation. I leaned against the counter quietly. You haven't called in nearly a decade, Camille. I know. And now suddenly you care? That's not fair. I laughed softly before I could stop myself. Not kind laughter. Tired laughter. Fair. The line went quiet. Then Camille sighed heavily. You always make things harder than they need to be. The sentence stunned me. Because it sounded exactly like our mother. Same tone. Same emotional deflection. I suddenly realized something painful. Families pass down emotional habits like inheritance. I have to go, I said calmly. Vanessa, wait. But I hung up first. For the first time in years. It felt good. That night Marcus found me sitting alone on the back patio after the twins fell asleep. Brooklyn lights shimmered softly beyond the railing. Cold air. Quiet city sounds. October wind. He handed me a mug of tea without speaking. I took it gratefully. Camille called. Marcus sat beside me slowly. How bad? She sounded worried. That caught his attention immediately. Marcus stared out toward the city for a second. Then it's worse than the papers are saying. I looked at him carefully. You already know what's happening, don't you? He didn't answer directly. That was answer enough. A month later, federal investigators officially raided 2 Whitmore development offices in Stamford. News helicopters circled buildings. Financial blogs exploded. Photographs spread online within hours. I saw my father leaving one building surrounded by attorneys. For the first time in my life. He looked old. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone realizing influence no longer worked the way it used to. Marcus watched the coverage silently from the living room while Jackson played video games on the floor nearby, completely unaware that his grandfather's empire was imploding on national television. Do the kids know anything? I asked quietly. Marcus shook his head once. They deserve better than inheriting this. That sentence stayed with me. Because Marcus never spoke about my family with hatred. Only disappointment. And somehow disappointment feels colder. 3 days later, Ethan showed up at our house unannounced. I opened the front door and almost didn't recognize him. Dark circles under his eyes. Wrinkled coat. Nervous energy. Like stress had physically shrunk him. Hey, he said awkwardly. For a second neither of us moved. Then I hugged him. I didn't plan to. It just happened. And suddenly my little brother started crying against my shoulder in the doorway. Real crying. Not polished Whitmore emotions. Not controlled silence. Actual exhaustion. Marcus appeared quietly at the end of the hallway but said nothing. Ethan pulled away embarrassed. Sorry. It's okay. No one in our family ever said those words growing up. Inside, Ethan sat stiffly at the kitchen table while Marcus made coffee. The twins stared curiously from the hallway. This is Uncle Ethan, I explained gently. The children smiled politely. Ethan looked devastated. Because in that moment he realized something brutal. He had missed their entire lives. 10 years of birthdays. School plays. Christmas mornings. Gone. All because our father demanded loyalty over love. Ethan stared down into his coffee cup. Dad's company is drowning. Marcus remained calm beside the counter. How bad? Ethan exhaled shakily. They're selling debt to stay alive. Something invisible shifted in the room. Marcus went still. Not surprised. Focused. Ethan rubbed both hands together nervously. There are rumors some investment firms are buying controlling portions quietly. Marcus said nothing. Then Ethan added, if the wrong people gain leverage, Dad loses everything. Marcus finally spoke. Maybe he already has. The sentence landed heavily. Ethan looked up slowly. And, for the first time, I noticed fear in my brother's face when he looked at Marcus. Not because Marcus raised his voice. Because he didn't. Controlled men frighten people more when they stay calm. Ethan swallowed hard. Then he said the sentence that made my stomach drop. There's one firm Dad can't identify. Marcus remained perfectly still. Ethan continued carefully. They've been acquiring Whitmore debt through shell corporations for almost 3 years. Silence. Long enough for realization to crawl slowly through my chest. I turned toward Marcus. He looked back at me calmly. Unreadable. Then Ethan whispered, whoever they are, they own enough to destroy us. Us. Not the company. The family. Marcus set his coffee cup down carefully onto the marble counter. Perfectly centered. The exact same way he placed that untouched coffee cup at my parents' dinner table 11 years earlier. And suddenly, I knew. Before anyone said it. Before the truth fully arrived. I knew Marcus had been waiting for this moment for years. I knew Marcus was the anonymous investor 2 days before he admitted it. Not because he told me. Because I finally opened the leather case. I wasn't trying to betray him. At least that's what I told myself afterward. The twins were at school. Marcus was in Manhattan meeting with clients. Rain hammered softly against the brownstone windows while I searched his office for a missing insurance document. That's all I intended to find. But the leather case sat partially unzipped beside the desk for the first time in 11 years. Open. Just slightly. Like a mistake. Or maybe a test. I stared at it for almost a full minute. Every instinct told me to walk away. But curiosity is dangerous when silence has lived inside a marriage too long. Slowly, I pulled the zipper open. Inside were folders organized with terrifying precision. Property records. Debt acquisitions. Corporate structures. Legal filings. And one name repeated over and over again across hundreds of pages. Whitmore Holdings. My pulse started pounding immediately. I flipped through the documents faster. Shell corporations. Silent acquisitions. Debt transfers routed through investment groups in Delaware and Chicago. Marcus had been buying pieces of my father's empire for years. Quietly. Patiently. The earliest documents dated back almost 6 years. 6 years. Meaning while I was crying over returned Christmas cards, Marcus was already positioning himself financially around my father's collapse. A cold wave moved through my chest. Then I found the notebook. Black leather. No label. Inside were handwritten notes in Marcus's sharp, controlled handwriting. Not emotional rants. Not revenge fantasies. Observations. Charles Whitmore overvalues image preservation. Likely to refinance rather than admit weakness publicly. Pride creates predictable financial behavior. I sat down slowly in Marcus's desk chair. Because suddenly, I understood something horrifying. Marcus hadn't been chasing revenge emotionally. He had been studying my father strategically. The same way chess players study opponents before endgames. Then I reached the final page. One sentence. Underlined once. When powerful people mistake love for weakness, they eventually weaponize desperation against themselves. The front door downstairs opened suddenly. My entire body froze. Marcus. I heard his footsteps moving through the hallway. Steady. Unhurried. Then he stopped at the office door. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Rain tapped softly against the windows behind me. Marcus looked at the open case. Then at the notebook in my hands. His expression didn't change. I was going to tell you, he said quietly. I laughed once in disbelief. When it became necessary. The calmness in his voice unsettled me immediately. I stood slowly. You've been planning this for years. Marcus closed the office door behind him gently. I've been preparing. That's not better. His jaw tightened slightly. The first real crack in his composure I'd seen all day. Vanessa, you bought my father's debt. Yes. The honesty hit harder than denial would have. I stared at him. All this time, while I was grieving my family. Marcus stepped closer carefully. Your family tried to destroy our lives. That doesn't explain this. It explains exactly this. The room fell silent. Not angry silence. Worse. Truthful silence. Marcus rubbed one hand slowly across his jaw before speaking again. You think I did this because I hate your father, don't you? No. That answer surprised me. Marcus glanced toward the open notebook on the desk. Hatred makes people careless. The rain outside intensified. Water streaked across the office windows while Manhattan glowed faintly in the distance. I watched your father humiliate you publicly, Marcus continued quietly. I watched him erase you financially. I watched your mother return ultrasound photos unopened. And every single time, they believed there would never be consequences because people like them rarely face any. His voice never rose. That somehow made the words heavier. You should have told me. Marcus nodded once. You're right. That admission disarmed me slightly. No excuses. No manipulation. Just truth. I sat back down slowly, exhausted suddenly. Marcus, what happens now? For the first time since entering the room. He hesitated. Then he walked toward the window overlooking Brooklyn. The federal investigation accelerated everything. I looked at the documents scattered across the desk. You own enough to destroy them. No, he corrected calmly. They already destroyed themselves. There it was again. That terrifying emotional precision. Marcus never framed himself as the villain. Or even the avenger. Only the man patient enough to wait for gravity to finish its work. I looked back down at the notebook. You wrote all of this? Yes. You kept records for years. Marcus turned toward me slowly. So did your father. I frowned. What does that mean? A strange expression crossed Marcus's face then. Something colder. More personal. He walked back toward the desk and opened one of the folders carefully. Inside were copies of old emails, private correspondence, internal memos, and at the center of it all, one document with my father's signature. Marcus slid it toward me silently. I read the first paragraph once. Then again. My stomach dropped. It was a recommendation letter, dated 11 years earlier, written by my father. Sent privately to one of the senior partners at Marcus's law firm. My hands started shaking before I even finished reading. Charles Whitmore strongly advised against placing Marcus Reed in positions involving client-sensitive financial oversight due to concerns regarding cultural compatibility and professional optics. I looked up slowly. Marcus watched me carefully. He sabotaged your career. Marcus said nothing. That silence confirmed everything. Suddenly memories rearranged themselves violently in my head. The lost promotion. The sudden coldness from senior partners. The opportunities disappearing without explanation. My father. The entire time. He tried to bury you professionally, I whispered. Marcus nodded once. He assumed I'd never find out. The room tilted emotionally. Because this changed everything. This wasn't just prejudice anymore. This was deliberate destruction. I looked back down at the letter again. Professional optics. My father had hidden racism inside corporate language so cleanly it almost looked respectable. Almost. How did you get this? Marcus's eyes hardened slightly. The partner who received it retired 3 years ago. The implication settled slowly over me. Marcus had been uncovering truths quietly for years. Every humiliation. Every manipulation. Every hidden move. Documented. Stored. Waiting. Then Marcus said something that chilled me completely. Your father's terrified right now. I looked up. Why? Marcus reached forward and closed the leather case carefully. Because for the first time in 11 years, Charles Whitmore finally understood something. The man he once called a disgrace now controlled whether his empire survived. My parents arrived exactly 7 minutes late. Not because of traffic. Because people like Charles and Eleanor Whitmore believed arriving late established control. Even now. Even desperate. I stood near the penthouse windows watching black rain slide down the glass while Marcus adjusted the cuff of his charcoal suit beside me. Calm. Perfectly composed. Like this was just another business meeting. But I knew better now. Nothing about tonight was accidental. The private elevator chimed softly across the foyer. Then silence. A long, heavy silence before the doors finally opened. My mother stepped out first. And for the first time in my life, Eleanor Whitmore looked uncertain. Camel wool coat. Pearl earrings. Perfect makeup. But her posture had changed. Smaller somehow. My father followed behind her carrying exhaustion like visible weight. He looked older than he had 3 months earlier. Not physically fragile. Worn down. Like the world had finally stopped rearranging itself around his confidence. Ethan came last. His eyes found mine immediately with quiet apology. No one spoke at first. Because suddenly the room had reversed itself completely from that dinner 11 years ago. Back then, my parents stood inside power while Marcus quietly endured humiliation. Now they stood inside his home. Waiting. Marcus walked toward them calmly. No hostility. No arrogance. That somehow made everything more uncomfortable. Mr. Whitmore, he said evenly. My father swallowed once before answering. Marcus. No sir this time. No subtle superiority. Just Marcus. The elevator doors closed softly behind them. Rain pressed against the windows 50 floors above Manhattan. Finally, my mother forced a careful smile toward me. You look well, Vanessa. The sentence almost made me laugh. 11 years. And that was what she chose. Not, I missed you. Not, I'm sorry. Just polite observation. I am well, I replied calmly. Marcus motioned toward the sitting area. Please. The same word my mother used the first night she let him into the Whitmore estate. Only now. He owned the room. My father sat stiffly on the edge of the leather sofa, while Marcus remained standing near the fireplace. Controlled positioning. Intentional. Even now, Marcus understood psychological space better than anyone I'd ever known. Ethan stayed quiet near the windows. My mother folded her hands tightly in her lap. Finally, my father cleared his throat. You understand why we're here? Marcus nodded once. Yes. Nothing more. The silence stretched painfully. My father wasn't used to working for conversation. People usually rushed to fill silence around him. Marcus never did. Eventually, Charles Whitmore leaned forward slightly. The restructuring agreement requires final authorization from your holding company. Marcus remained calm. It does. My father's jaw tightened almost invisibly. He hated this already. Hated needing anything. Hated lacking leverage. I'd like to resolve this professionally. Marcus looked at him steadily for several seconds. Then, professionally? The word landed softly. But underneath it sat 11 years of history. My mother jumped in quickly. We all understand emotions are involved. No, Marcus interrupted gently. The room went still instantly. Emotions ended years ago. I felt a chill move through me. Because he meant it. Marcus wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned away long ago. What remained was colder. Precision. My father straightened slightly. What exactly do you want? There it was. The real question. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Terms. Marcus walked slowly toward the bar cart beside the windows and poured himself a glass of water. Unhurried. Every movement deliberate. Then he turned back toward my parents. I'll sign the agreement Monday morning. Relief flashed across my mother's face immediately. Ethan exhaled quietly. Even my father's shoulders loosened slightly. But then Marcus continued. After your family tells Vanessa the truth. The air disappeared from the room. My mother froze completely. My father's expression hardened instantly. Ethan looked terrified. And suddenly, I understood this meeting was never about money. Marcus could have signed already if money was all he wanted. No, this was about something else. Something buried. What truth? I whispered. Nobody answered. My pulse started rising. I looked toward Marcus. His expression remained unreadable. Then slowly, my father stood. "I don't know what game you think you're playing." Marcus didn't react. "Sit down, Charles," my mother whispered sharply. "No." For the first time that night, anger cracked through his composure. My father looked at Marcus with open resentment now. "You've waited years for this, haven't you?" Marcus took a slow sip of water. "I waited for accountability." "That's convenient." "No," Marcus replied calmly. "What's convenient is pretending history disappears when powerful people become uncomfortable." The room went dead silent. I stared between them desperately. "What truth?" My voice came out louder this time. Still nobody answered. Then Marcus walked toward his office quietly. A second later, he returned carrying the leather case. My stomach tightened immediately. My father's face lost color the second he saw it. That reaction terrified me. Marcus placed the case carefully onto the glass coffee table. Click. The silver locks opened softly. Inside sat folders stacked with terrifying organization. Documents. Letters. Emails. Photographs. Evidence. Years of it. My mother whispered. "Oh my God." Marcus removed one folder slowly, then handed it directly to me. My fingers shook taking it. Inside were copies of emails between my father and senior executives at Marcus's old law firm. More than one letter. Multiple. Dozens. I read line after line while nausea climbed slowly into my throat. Concerns regarding client optics. Questionable cultural alignment with legacy clientele. Potential reputational complications. It never said black directly. Because men like my father preferred elegant racism. Clean racism. Professional racism. The kind hidden behind corporate vocabulary. "You destroyed his career," I whispered. My father's silence answered everything. Marcus stood quietly beside the windows. Still calm. Always calm. Then I found another document. And suddenly, the room tilted. It was my father's signature authorizing private investigators to examine Marcus's financial history before our wedding. Bank records. Family background. Personal associates. My hands started shaking violently. "You investigated him?" My mother finally spoke. "We were trying to protect you." I looked up at her slowly. "No," I said softly. "You were trying to control me." Tears filled her eyes immediately. But even now, something felt wrong. Incomplete. Marcus watched my face carefully. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "Keep reading." My pulse pounded in my ears. I turned the page and found another letter. Only this one wasn't from my father. It was from my mother. Private correspondence sent to the board of trustees at the private school where I had been teaching years earlier. The same school that suddenly cut my contract after vague budget restructuring. My eyes scanned the paragraph once. Then again. Eleanor Whitmore had warned them that employing me could create unnecessary public controversy connected to the Whitmore family brand. The room blurred instantly. My own mother. My breathing became uneven. She got me fired. Nobody denied it. Nobody. I looked toward my mother in complete disbelief. Tears rolled silently down her face now. "We thought if things became difficult enough, you'd come home." The sentence hit harder than anything else that night. Because suddenly I understood the full truth. My parents didn't just reject my marriage. They tried to break it. Systematically. Financially. Professionally. Emotionally. Marcus watched me carefully across the room. Not triumphant. Not satisfied. Almost protective. Like he knew this truth would hurt more than the revenge ever could. Then my father said something quietly from behind me. Something that made the entire room freeze again. "You still haven't told her the worst part." Silence. Heavy. Terrible silence. I slowly turned toward him. "What worst part?" Nobody moved. Rain struck the penthouse windows in soft, violent waves while my father stood near the leather sofa, looking suddenly exhausted. Older. Smaller. And for the first time in my life, afraid. "What worst part?" I asked again. My voice barely sounded like mine. My mother shook her head immediately. "Charles, don't." But my father laughed bitterly under his breath. "That's the problem, Eleanor," he said quietly. "We should have told her years ago." Marcus remained near the windows in complete silence, watching, waiting. Then my father looked directly at me. The law firm wasn't the first thing we interfered with. A cold feeling crawled slowly through my chest. "What does that mean?" Nobody answered fast enough. And suddenly, I didn't want the answer anymore. My mother's eyes filled completely now. "Vanessa, when you got engaged," my father continued flatly, "Marcus received another job offer before New York." Marcus's jaw tightened almost invisibly. I turned toward him immediately. "What?" He said nothing. That terrified me. My father exhaled slowly. "A firm in Chicago." My stomach dropped. I remembered that. Barely. Marcus once mentioned a major offer disappearing unexpectedly right before our wedding. At the time, he blamed internal restructuring. My father looked down at the floor before continuing. "I made sure they withdrew it." The room tilted. "What?" "It would have moved you away permanently," he said quietly. "At the time, we thought distance would end the relationship." I stared at him in horror. "You sabotaged his career before we were even married?" My mother started crying openly now. "We thought we were helping you." Helping. That word nearly broke something inside me. Marcus finally spoke, calm as ever. "They offered me triple my New York salary." I looked at him slowly. "You knew?" I suspected. The rain outside intensified. And suddenly all the missing years rearranged themselves inside my head. The tiny apartment, the financial struggle, the promotions disappearing, the opportunities collapsing. My parents hadn't just rejected my marriage. They engineered our suffering. For 11 years. I covered my mouth trying to breathe through the shock. Then Marcus walked toward the coffee table quietly. He picked up the restructuring agreement. One signature away from saving my father's empire. Charles Whitmore watched him carefully. Desperately. Marcus uncapped the pen slowly. Then stopped. And looked directly at my parents. "You spent 11 years trying to teach Vanessa that love should be conditional," he said softly. The room went completely silent. Then Marcus placed the pen down beside the unsigned papers. "But my children," he continued calmly, "will never learn that lesson from me." My father's face changed instantly. Confusion. Relief. Humiliation. All at once. And as Marcus finally reached for the contract again, I realized something devastating. The real revenge was never destroying my family. It was proving Marcus had become a better man than either of my parents ever were. Marcus signed the agreement at 9:14 Monday morning. No dramatic speech. No celebration. Just a quiet signature inside a Manhattan conference room filled with attorneys pretending not to stare at the history sitting across the table. My father looked 20 years older watching it happen. The restructuring saved portions of Whitmore Commercial Holdings. Not all of it. Several luxury developments were still seized. 2 federal investigations remained active. And most importantly, my father lost controlling ownership permanently. Marcus made sure of that. Enough people were protected to keep innocent employees from losing jobs. But the Whitmore empire itself? That never fully recovered. And somehow that felt right. Because the real damage had started long before the debt. It started the moment my parents chose reputation over love. 3 months later, my parents sold the Connecticut estate. The house I grew up in. The Christmas staircase covered in garland every December. The dining room where my father called my marriage a disgrace. Gone. A private equity family from Boston bought it quietly. No farewell party. No society page photographs. Just another wealthy family replacing an older one people no longer feared. That's the thing about social power. It disappears faster than people think. Especially in places built entirely on appearances. I heard through Ethan that my mother stopped attending charity galas after several longtime friends distanced themselves publicly. Country club invitations slowed. Board memberships disappeared. People suddenly became busy. The same social world my parents sacrificed me to protect. Eventually abandoned them too. Marcus never celebrated any of it. Not once. That mattered. One evening, about 6 months after the meeting in the penthouse, I found him standing alone on our Brooklyn patio watching rain move across the city skyline. Still rain. Always rain somehow. You okay? I asked softly. Marcus nodded once. Then after a long silence, he said, I used to imagine this would feel different. I leaned beside him carefully. Different how? He thought about it for several seconds. More satisfying. The honesty surprised me. I looked out across the city lights with him. Does it? Marcus gave a small shrug. Not really. For years, I thought revenge would look loud, explosive. But standing beside my husband that night, I realized real revenge was much quieter than people imagine. It looked like peace. It looked like stability. It looked like children growing up loved without conditions. My parents reached out more after the restructuring. Mostly my mother. Careful texts. Holiday cards. Small attempts at rebuilding something from the ruins. But trust doesn't regenerate just because guilt finally appears. That was the hardest part for her to understand. One Saturday afternoon, nearly a year later, she asked if she could meet the twins. I stared at the message for almost an hour before answering. Marcus never pressured me either way. They're your parents, he said quietly. You decide what access means. That sentence healed something inside me. Because control had always been the language of my childhood. Permission. Approval. Conditions. Marcus never loved me that way. In the end, I agreed to one lunch. Neutral location. Public restaurant. 2 hours. Boundaries. My mother cried the moment she saw Lily and Jackson. Not dramatic crying. Quiet grief. Like someone realizing time cannot be refunded. The twins were polite but distant. Children know when relationships are unfamiliar. At one point Lily asked innocently, "Why haven't we met you before?" The entire table went silent. My mother looked like the question physically hurt her. And for the first time in my life, I didn't rescue her from discomfort. She answered herself. Because Grandma made some very bad choices. That mattered more than any apology she'd ever given. My father never fully changed. I think people like Charles Whitmore rarely do. But he became quieter. Less certain. Sometimes during those awkward family lunches, I'd catch him watching Marcus with an expression I still struggle to describe. Not hatred. Not even resentment anymore. Recognition maybe. Because deep down, my father finally understood something humiliating. The man he once viewed as beneath him had shown more integrity than he ever did. One night, after the twins had gone upstairs to bed, I walked into Marcus's office and found the leather case sitting open on the desk. Empty. Every document gone. Every record archived somewhere else. The case that had carried 11 years of silence suddenly looked strangely small. Marcus noticed me standing there. Then he closed the lid softly. I think I'm done carrying it now, he said. No anger. No triumph. Just exhaustion finally allowed to rest. I walked over slowly and touched the top of the case. For years, I thought losing my family had ruined my life. But standing there in our quiet home while Marcus locked the case one final time, I realized something my parents never understood. Love was never supposed to be something you earned by becoming easier to accept. Real love stayed. Even when obedience didn't.